I like saying that. Hi, welcome everyone to this, I think 10th or 11th, I think 11th now year, although we of course had a little bit of interruption during COVID to the Al Gold Memorial Lecture Series. And it's really an honor to have everybody here. I want to welcome everybody on behalf of the Visual Arts Program and the Stockton Art Gallery, which is part of our program. And in particular, before I bring on our dean to give us some welcoming remarks, I want to make sure I get a chance to thank Ryan Casey and Allie Wilson, both of our staff in the art gallery, everybody in the visual arts program, everyone and all the staff in the Arts and Humanities Office that helps to support programs of this nature. And in particular, we will I have a couple of quick announcements. One, always one of the most important ones, please make sure you have either turned off or muted your cell phone before we begin, so double check that in case you forgot. And I also want to just thank everyone that has come out today to hear the lecture. This is going to be really a remarkable pair of talks, both by Vicki Gold-Levy and then Ron Tarver. And I'm going to start by asking our dean, Dr. Ian Marshall, to come up and give you a few welcoming remarks. So please welcome the dean.
Thank you, Professor White. Good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of the School of Arts and Humanities, it really is an honor to be here and welcome you to the Al Gold Memorial Lecture Series. Al Gold, this series is in honor of Al Gold, who was a photographer by training, who sort of self-trained himself, right? And he was affectionately known as Goldie. He earned a place in the Atlantic City Hall of Fame because of his photography skills. We are grateful to his daughter Vicki, my friend, for honoring his skill, his memory, and his contributions to Atlantic City, and for supporting this lecture series, and also to Stockton University students of photography who were awarded the Al Gold Memorial Purchase Award each year. This series was in fact created by Vicki and Wendell, and we're very grateful to you for keeping this going. My thanks to both of them, and also to the program, I'm sorry. My thanks to the program and also to the Stockton University. Please welcome Wendell White back to the stage.
Okay, so just a brief introduction, and we're going to then move along. By the way, I did forget one other little announcement. One of the things that we're going to do today a little bit differently for those of you that have attended in the past is that at the very end of the lecture, at the end of Ron's lecture, we're going to hold questions. Ron will be here for the reception, and I'm going to ask people to have conversation with him during the reception in the area that's going to be just outside, right around the corner. So we won't have a traditional Q&A at the end, but there will be plenty of time to have conversation, intimate conversations with Ron afterwards. But let me get ready to introduce Vicki. And as the dean already indicated, we've worked together for quite a long time. And in fact, Vicki and I were just mentioning the fact that we were first introduced by another Stockton member of the Stockton community, Phyllis Alstead, and it was in the late 1980s when Vicki was working on an exhibition and she needed somebody to help with some fairly archaic photographic material. Phyllis introduced us, and I was able to help make prints for the first exhibition that we worked on together. And then we worked on a number of exhibitions after that. And the other part of what grew into the memorial lecture as well as the Purchase Awards is that during those years, there were many times in which students volunteered and helped with the fabrication of exhibitions that were held on Garden Pier for a number of years. I'll give you the quick written part here. Vicki Gold-Levy is an author, curator, historical consultant, and collector. She is best known as an Atlantic City historian and consultant on the HBO television series Boardwalk Empire and the 1997 musical Steel Pier. She was born and raised in Atlantic City to parents Albert, Al, and Beverly Gold. I have to include her mom, too. Her father, who went by the name Al, photographed the first Miss America pageant in 1921 and became the city's first chief photographer in 1939. In 1985, Vicki founded the Atlantic City Historical Museum along with Florence Miller and Anthony Kuchera. The museum contained over 150 years of the city's history. It was first located at Garden Pier on the boardwalk until 2014 when the museum closed. In 2019, the artifacts were relocated to the lobby of the Jim Whalen Boardwalk Hall, now known as the Atlantic City Experience. And so for all of our Stockton students, when you attend your graduation, there'll be a perfect opportunity. And for those of our Stockton students that live in Atlantic City, you should just walk up the boardwalk and check it out. Levy is credited as a historical consultant on the HBO television series. She was also a consultant on films Beaches in 1988, Atlantic City in 1980, and the musical Steel Pier, which I mentioned before. She has numerous credit and numerous book publications as an author or co-author, including Atlantic City, 125 Years of Ocean Madness, Cuba Style, Graphics from the Golden Age of Design, and Times Square Style, Graphics from the Golden Age of Broadway. Recently, she's been working with the Wolfsonian at Florida International University on exhibitions related to Cuban culture, art, and music. Most important to our community, she has been a longtime supporter of this lecture series and nearly 3 decades of support for the Al Gold Memorial Purchase Award for Student Photography. A selection of the Purchase photographs appear in the halls of the Arts and Science Building near the Photography Lab, along with one of Al Gold's photographs and a plaque. Please join me in welcoming Vicki Gold-Levy.
Wendell, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And it's very nice to be back here again. And it's also very comforting to me to continue to do this series in honor of my father. Not only did I love him, but he was a really talented photographer. Otherwise, I wouldn't take up your time. I also, Wendell already welcomed Ian Marshall and everybody else, but I also have people here from the Historic Organ Restoration Committee in Boardwalk Hall, which is the world's largest pipe organ, over 33,000 pipes. Am I correct in that, Scott? And also a lot of the board of the Atlantic City Foundation of the Atlantic City Free Public Library, and I'm chair, and our director, Melissa McGarry, is here. And also I want to welcome Miss Main from a few years ago who came here, and Teddy O'Keefe, who ran the Sun newspaper, which was very active during casino era. And I also want to invite all of you tomorrow at the Garage, which is the Noise Museum. We're showing a screening at 6 o'clock. It's called Along the Eastern Seaboard, and Virginia Arquetti's father was an amateur photographer and had a large collection of films he collected and that he shot. And I did the voiceover. This was done in New York, and we're going to have a panel afterwards, and that's at 6 o'clock at the Noise. So you're all invited to that. Now I'm going to do the Al Gold Memorial Lecture. Okay, Wendell already told you about my dad. His nickname was Goldie, and he was very beloved by all the photographers who came into town. He was originally from Philadelphia, and he contracted typhoid fever when he was about 20, 21, and he came down to the shore for the, quote, waters. And while he was down here, he used to go to Bader Field and watch all the famous fighters train, and he became enamored with photography. So he was, as Wendell said, self-trained, but he was a very fine photographer, and he became the chief photographer of the city. There's my dad with a speed graphics camera, and that was always with him. And he always sort of, in those days, he had a dark room his office was always in Convention Hall, Boardwalk Hall today. And in the dark room, which is now offices, they used to have all these chemicals, and they would do all these things where they would, capture the film, and then they would hang it up to dry with clothespins, and then would actually go through a big piece of machinery that would take out all the liquid. Wendell, am I making sense of everything I'm saying? So I hung up in my father's dark room for many, 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 many years. There he is, very dapper, and that's like an early version of the speed graphics, kind of a box camera, and there he is walking on the boardwalk. Now, my dad, Wendell had said, photographed the first Miss America pageant, and he always photographed until his death every Miss America pageant, and here he is with a lot of the contestants, and there he is, and there's his camera. And that's my parents walking down the boardwalk. My father also photographed so many of the stars. The stars who came to Atlantic City were so much more available than they are today. I mean, I can remember seeing Sammy Davis Jr. on the beach and talking to him, or Martin and Lewis. You know, it was just, it was a lot more accessible. This is one of my dad's famous pictures of horses on the beach. And Disney World has made a giant oil painting of this that hangs in their convention center. My dad won the Associated Press Award for this picture. Joe Hackney, I don't know how many people, Bob, you probably remember Joe Hackney. He was a very famous fireman, sportsman, swimmer. And this is a picture where my dad was in another helicopter leaning out, and he captured this picture. It's a beautiful picture right in midair. And this is, let me see if I can do this. Okay. This is Jimmy Durante. He was a very famous star in the 50s. And that's Hap Farley, Senator Hap Farley. Some of you older people might remember Hap. He was a very important political figure. And that's Skinny D'Amata, who was the owner of the 500 Club. This is a picture of Barry Gray. Barry Gray was a mutual coast-to-coast talk show. And that's Count Basie. And that's Benny Davis, who wrote the song Margie. I'm sure you don't know who that is. Maybe a few of you do. But these were very popular figures in their day. Okay, this is a picture of the Seagulls. This was the pro hockey team that played in Boardwalk Hall. Then it was Convention Hall. And that is Arthur Dorrington, who is beloved. He was the first professional African-American hockey player and a very beloved guy, and did a lot of stuff with youth. And my father was very fond of him. He took this picture. This is at the 500 Club, 54. It was Dean Martin, Janet Leigh, and Jerry Lewis coming down here for one of their movie premieres. Of course, Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin were a famous comedy team, and they got together at the 500 Club in 1946. Dean Martin was a crooner, and Jerry Lewis was a pantomimist, and they just got together and cracked up the audience, and then they became a very, very famous comedy team. This is a lovely picture Dad took of someone when we really actually had newspapers. Philadelphia Inquirer, the Atlantic City Press, the Herald Tribune. This is Izzy Weintraub. He was, I don't know the year, but he was the clam eating champion, and I love that picture. I think my father's pictures always had like, I don't know what you would exactly call it, but a crispness to his images, you know. And this is on Million Dollar Pier. It was a ride that went round and round, and I love this picture too. It's so animated, yeah. This was the 100th anniversary of Atlantic City in 1954, and this was a faux cake that was at Boardwalk Hall. Dad had a good sense of humor. This is Dad, and that is, there was a famous series called Our Gang comedy, and Pete was, I don't know if this was the dog, but it was a dog being Pete. That was on Central Steel Pier, actually. And there's Dad fooling around with him. And this is Dad with B.B. Shop, who was Miss America 1948. And they all really got along great with Al. And this is, she's autographing his bald head and having a good joke doing it. And here is a famous picture, Dad and Marilyn Monroe. She was the hostess and the marshal of the Miss America parade in 1952, I think, yeah. And my father spent all day with her. My father photographed all kinds of famous people, but he had a soft spot for Marilyn Monroe. And interestingly enough, it's my mother's favorite picture too. She loved her too. So that's very cute. And this is, that's me, the little one. Dad took this towards the end of the war. I was selling war bonds in Atlantic City. You know, I don't know how many of you know this, but Atlantic City during World War II was totally taken over by the Army Air Force. And they marched on the boardwalk, and they did their maneuvers on the beach, and all the hotels became barracks, and resorts was the Thomas England General Hospital for amputees and rest and rehabilitation. And we were an Army Air Force town. So there I am doing my share. So this is just a little introduction to my dad's photography and who he was and why I'm inspired to keep this up. And I have such a great partner in Professor Wendell White. We've worked together, I think, 30 years. And he's not only the smartest guy you want to meet, but the kindest man you want to know. So thank you, everybody. And now we're going to have our next speaker that I'm very excited about.
Okay. Thanks, Vicki. And let's see. 10. Yeah, I think, hey, I hate to say it, but we're probably coming up on 35 years or more. But anyway, who's counting? And now I'm really excited to introduce and bring up a wonderful photographer, an artist, a friend, somebody who I have been connected with for a number of years now as well, who has remarkable work and who has some remarkable things to talk about in terms of his work. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he may even talk about the influence of his dad as well, who was a photographer also. So we have a kind of parallel track here. But let me introduce a little bit about Ron, and then I'll bring him up. Ron Tarver received a BA in journalism and graphic arts from Northeastern State University in Oklahoma. And I don't necessarily say it here, but just to add to this, because it'll be important later on, he'll probably talk about it. Ron was born in Fort Gibson, Oklahoma. He's an associate professor at Swarthmore College. Before joining the faculty at Swarthmore, he had had been a staff photojournalist at the Philadelphia Inquirer for 32 years, where he shares the 2012 Pulitzer Prize for his work on a series documenting school violence in Philadelphia public school system. During his time at the Inquirer, he was nominated for 3 Pulitzers, as well as many other national, state, and local honors. Professor Tarver's work has appeared in National Geographic, Life, Time, Newsweek, Sports Illustrated, Ebony, Jet, Black and White Magazine, Huffington Post, and Hyperallergenic, among others. He is the co-author of the book, We Were There, Voices of African American Veterans, published by HarperCollins in 2004, which was accompanied by a traveling exhibition that debuted at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. His latest book, The Long Ride Home, Black Cowboys in America, was released on August 31st, 2024, and for a while had the first printing sold out, was out of print, but they have done, I've just talked to him, and I knew they were doing this. There has been a second printing, and now the book is once again available. It's a wonderful book, by the way. He is a recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, Pew Fellowships, as well as grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and 2 Independent Foundation Fellowships. His work has been exhibited nationally and internationally in over 30 solo and 50 group exhibitions, and is included in museum collections, including the Smithsonian National Museum of American Art, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the State Museum of Pennsylvania, Oklahoma History Center, and many other corporate and private collections. And just earlier, we were talking about the fact that the Long Ride Home, Black Cowboys in America exhibition looks like it's all set to become a touring exhibition, so that number of solo exhibitions is going to skyrocket over the next 5 years tremendously. And he will also be participating in a group exhibition that I'm putting together for our gallery in the fall. So you'll be able to come back and see his work, as well as get a chance to see him once again. It's my honor to bring up Professor Ron Tarver.
Wow, there are people out here. Thanks for inviting me. I want to really thank Wendell for giving me this opportunity to talk to you today. Vicki, your father's work is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to get into that in a minute. So, and Ryan, wherever you are, thanks for all your facilitating, making this work. Yeah, back there. So this speed graphic camera here, that was my first camera, actually. That was the first camera I really learned photography on, in terms of, how to, when I was in college, actually. He wasn't a professor. I worked for the campus communications, so I was one of the photographers, and he started all the freshmen out on a speed graphic. And if you've never looked or held or looked through a speed graphic, it is dumb as a hammer. It doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't give you an exposure reading. Definitely not digital. It gives you a big 4x5 inch negative that's upside down and backwards when you look through the ground glass. I hated it, but he made us shoot everything with it. We shot football, we shot portraits, we shot events, everything. All the freshmen shot with this 4x5 graphic. And I hated it so much that I start all of my students out with a 4x5. That's what they have to learn from. I learned so much from that camera because you learn composition, you learn framing, you learn how to balance a composition. We just got out of a crit today where we were talking about for their midterm, I had them all focus on still lifes, and which I think is a really great way to learn composition. Yeah, it's a horrible camera, and I love it to death because I did a lot of my work with one, not necessarily a speed graphic, but 4x5, more of it's called a monorail, a studio camera, but I've done a lot of work with that and a field camera too. That's a 4x5, and I'll show you some of that work in a minute. So let me get started here. So I call this talk 40 Years an Idea. It's sort of a takeoff on the 40 Years a Slave, I think it was. It may have been Some Odd Years a Slave, but that movie. It's more of a takeoff on, like, I'm just captured by ideas. I love ideas. I'm a shiny penny kind of person. I'll throw a penny over there. If it's an idea, I'll chase it. And my career has started out in journalism, newspaper photography, has transitioned into art photography, has transitioned into sculpture, has transitioned into architecture. So, and we'll take you through this. And I also tell my students that the worst thing you can do is have a lecture by a photojournalist, because all we got is stories. So we may not get out of here until like 7 o'clock tonight, but I'll try and keep these slides down to a reasonable pace. So this is the first photograph I've made, not the first photograph I made, but the first photograph that I made for the first newspaper I worked at in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And this was a dance competition at the local civic center, and I saw this young woman tying her ballet shoe there, and she was in this beautiful light, and literally I ran and just threw myself on the ground and made this image. But it was the first picture that I made that I think really made me understand the quality of light. You know, when we photograph something, we're photographing light. When we walk around and we look at each other, when we look at objects, we're not looking at the object, we're looking at the light reflected off of that object. And the camera sees light differently than our eyes see it. The film doesn't have that range of vision. Well, it has the range of vision, but it doesn't have the range of tonality that our eyes have. So you have to, I always tell my students, you have to see how the camera sees, not how you see. But this really made me understand how the camera sees, how the camera views light. So I'm going to skip over I worked at Springfield, Missouri newspapers for a while. I'm going to skip over that because for 2.5 years, nothing happened at that newspaper. I was not pleased with anything that happened there. But anyway, it got me to the Philadelphia Inquirer. So this is my first photograph of my first front page picture for the Inquirer, and the story was about this guy that had these big cats in his backyard, and so I pull up, and he has this lions and tigers roaming around in his backyard in a cage, and he said, "Come on in." And I said, "There's no way I'm going in there. There's no way." And so I stood back with my lens, and I photographed him. He said, "Wait, they're not going to hurt you." So he walked up and he kissed this cat on the lips, and that was the picture. But the real reason I loved working at the Inquirer, was for the Sunday magazine, which is no longer around. It was a really great magazine. I was lucky enough to have multiple covers on the magazine, and it was so great because I could work on a story for a long period of time, and I love long form documentary photography, and so a lot of these images that are on the cover represented multiple images inside the magazine, but also it was a time that you could really sort of, talk about the breadth of a story and the depth of a story. So I'm going to show you a few of these. I'm not going to show you the entire piece because it would take too long, but just some snippets from it. So one of the first stories I did was Storefront Church. And I came from a small town in Oklahoma, Fort Gibson, Oklahoma, 900 people. We had one stoplight that everybody went around so they didn't have to stop at it. And I grew up in a very small little clapboard church. So when I moved out to Philadelphia, I hadn't been in a big city before. I'd never lived in a big city before. And I was really intrigued by all the different churches that were around, storefront churches, these small little churches that were maybe 40 feet wide and 80 feet deep. And so I walked up to one day, this one here, and I asked the minister, I said, would you mind if I came in and did a photo story on your, identify myself as a photographer? And he said, yeah, you come next Sunday and take some pictures. So I think he thought I was only going to be there one Sunday. I ended up spending like 3 months there in this church, and pretty much rewiring all their lights because it was so dark in there. So I had to run strobe lights up underneath the false ceiling to get some light in there. But it was such a great experience to be there and to sort of share their experience and their worship. This is Reverend Faust, was his name. He had a big red cross in the ceiling. And you can see how tight it is in there, just, folding chairs. It was a Pentecostal church, so I wanted to get some of the action that goes on in the Pentecostal churches, and I grew up in one. They're pretty lively. So there were times that I left the church and left this church, and all those chairs were flat, falling down. It just looked like a tornado would come through. But it was all in the spirit of the Spirit. So it was just a really, amazing place. This woman was praying, and she was really deep in prayer, but she was maybe about 3 or 4 feet from one of my big strobe lights. And I thought, man, if I pop that strobe off, it's going to freak her out. But I couldn't miss it. I couldn't miss this picture. So I popped it, and she didn't flinch. And it's also, the juxtaposition between the cross and the protection from what might happen to the church with the windows and the wire and things like that on the front of the church. This little boy was waiting for his parents to come and pick him up. Double Dutch jump rope. So one of the things that when I came to the Inquirer, I was one of only 2 black photographers at the time. And I felt that we weren't, as a newspaper, we were not going into the community and pulling out the little stories. Every time there was a crime that happened up there, we would be there. But there was so much life in the neighborhood, especially in North Philly. And so I wanted to go into those neighborhoods and pull out stories from there that are just, human interest stories, fun stories. So this is one of the ones that I did. So I found a group young girls that were going to, they had won a national competition, jump rope competition. And so I, found their coach and said, can you mind if I spend some time with them? And they said, yeah. So I started hanging out with them at their community center, doing practices. I could never get the feeling of the ropes, though. That was the problem. I just couldn't. I wanted to show the diamantism. Is that a word I just made up? I wanted to show how the ropes worked, but I couldn't show it in a single frame. So what I did was I went into into our studio at work, and I painted one of the walls black, and then I set up 2 big strobes on either side, and I invited the girls to come in, and let's just try out some things and see what happens. So this is what happened. So we did, we just played. I had no idea if this was going to work or not, because this is all shot in film. It's all shot on a single frame, so I had to, keep the frame in my camera in position to make this happen. And we just played. It's another one. And there's a lot of these. There's a lot of these. I shot so many, in fact, that I blew up one of the transformers in the building, and all the lights went out. So that's what ended the session. But I got enough to make do. You know, there were some other stories that happened, but one of the other big stories that I worked on was called the Badlands, which is kind of an unfortunate name now, but this is what was kind of what was generally called this area in North Philly, where it was really ridden by drugs. It was drug-ridden. And Life magazine had come in, and they had done a story that I thought was just a real hatchet job. I don't think that they portrayed the area well. I didn't think that they had given the people that lived there a fair shake. I had been working up in that area, so I knew what was going on in there. I'd been doing some things up there with the church. And so I took the photographs that I'd made to my city editor and said, you know, this is what's going on up there. I think we can do a better story than what Life did. And so they cut myself and David Zucchino, who had just gotten back from the Middle East, they just basically said, yeah, just go up there and see what you can find out. So we just went up there and started hanging out on the street. So you'd have to know David. David is an amazing, amazing reporter. He's a tall white dude, always wore a white shirt and jeans. And then there's me, you know. And I'm like, David, people are going to think we're cops. You know, you got to look more like the street. So he didn't do anything. So we just, people would come up, and naturally, you know, people would come up and said, and so I had all my cameras hanging off of me because I wanted to make sure that people knew that I was a photographer, I was not a cop. And so David, but we got into all sorts of places that I would have never imagined. We got into you know, drug houses. We got pretty tight with the cops who let us do some of the operations that they were doing up there. But we wanted to tell the story of not just from the drug side, but we wanted to tell it from the community side, from the police side, from the drug dealer side, from the drug overlords who actually made the product that was sent to the drug dealers on the street. We wanted to tell the entire story. So the story ended up running in the Sunday paper. Well, actually, in the broadsheet, the big paper, over a week, and then it ran in the Sunday magazine for this story that was about a family who had bought a house for $1. The city was selling houses for $1 to anybody that would go in and fix them up, and they had to live there for, I think it was a year or so, or 4 or 5 years, something like that. But anyway, so we found this family, the Carter family. They had just bought this house. They were fixing it up, and they were, you know, making it work. This was the Badlands, what you would call the Badlands. This is Hope Street, actually. If you go up there now, that street they're all condos. This is all cleaned up, you know, it's the Fishtown area, so it's all doesn't look like that now, but that was the conditions we were working in. This was a woman who they caught. They had this operation, police had an operation where they would surveil somebody buying drugs and then follow them outside the area and then make the arrest. And this woman was buying drugs with her baby in the seat there. This man was, you know, they found him. They pretty much, you know, had him, not strip him down, but had him unloose his clothes and things. They didn't find anything. They took his shoe off, and that little packet of heroin popped out of his shoe. He was a car dealer. Another story was we wanted to tell the story of the people that actually made the drugs. So we found a man who was a producer, and amazingly enough, he was very open in telling us everything about his operation, how it worked, how much it cost, finances of it. So we treated that story more like a finance story, like just the anatomy of how a drug company works. But while we were doing the story, somebody came up and bought it off of him. And that's how open it was up there. I mean, it was just, it was very, very, very open. People didn't have much, you know, they weren't too worried about getting caught, either using, selling, or dealing. So getting back to the Carter family, so they bought this house for $1. This is one of the kids out just, you know, doing what kids do, riding the bike. Up the street from their house was where all the drug, they were either abandoned homes or drug houses. They tried to keep a flag out. Mr. Carter was a vet, and but you know the people would throw rocks and things at it. Every Saturday, or as frequently as he could, he'd go out and he would sweep up in front of the house. But you know, naturally there was all sorts of drug paraphernalia out there, so the kids could play. They would have these impromptu dance parties in the house, you know, so the kids could socialize with their friends, but you know, out of any sort of harm's way. And also, sort of, you know, contrasting what was going on in their house. This is up the street from them. So this man was, he was a gatekeeper, and you had to pay him to get inside one of the drug houses. And if you need be, he would shoot you up for a fee. And there's a lot more that happened in this story, but City Hall found out that we were working on this story. And so they sent the cops up there to raid all the homes. And David and I found out through one of our sources that they were going to do this. So when they opened the door, the first raid, they saw David and I standing at the door. They're like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Well, what are you doing here?" And so they pulled everybody out of the homes, searched everybody, took people out by stretchers, and then they proceeded to tear the whole street down. They got up to the Carter's homes, left it stand, and then found them a home and tore their house down. So this is what it looked like after all the demolition. So, 25 years after that, this is where it's at now. And nothing has happened on the street. I mean, you know, the city said that it would come in and rebuild, and obviously nothing's happened there, but this is the same street. This is Stella Street, where, you know, nothing has really happened. So after that story, I was a little depressed, and I wanted something that was going to be a little more upbeat, that would be in color, that I thought I could do in a month and have it run out, you know, run in the magazine. I'd seen these guys riding their horses in town, and so I walked up and, you know, said, you know, would you mind if I hang out with you guys? Found a stable up there and hang out with you. This is one of the pictures from the stables. So these boys were, you know, just looking for some work, some after school money, and so they would wash this horse. They were letting it dry, and they picked up this basketball game in beautiful light. I went with the horse club. It was called the Western Wranglers. They were in the White House stables, and I went with them to a trip to New York, and this is one of them riding down Fifth Avenue. It's called, I call this Concrete Canyon. Mulgee, Oklahoma. This story was so popular after it ran in the magazine that we got more mail from this story than just about any other story that we had done. So I talked to my editors and said, "Look at this box of mail." And this is before, you know, email. This is all handwritten letters. And I said, "We got all this mail. How about if we do another story for Black History Month?" And so they green-lighted that idea. So I went out and I went across the country and found different stories. that we sort of celebrated sort of this Western heritage in the black community. This was Bumpsy, who owned the stables that I worked out of. He was riding in Harlem down the middle of the street. And the cop, I love the cop car back there, you know, didn't mind him too much. This is in Oklahoma. This is after I had sort of expanded the story out from Philadelphia and went across the country. This is in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, one of the largest black rodeos there. This little boy at a rodeo in Dallas. So compare his belt buckle to his head. They're about the same size. Did a lot of rodeos. You know, I didn't want to make the project about rodeos. I wanted to make it about, you know, everything sort of involving a black Western heritage. But I did spend a lot of time at rodeos. This is one of the men that I just photographed a couple of years ago. And let me see how do I get this to work now? Do I click it?
My name is
There we
David
go.
Solomon, and I'm a black cowboy. I was the first black cowboy that ever went to a high school rodeo in 1965, the year I graduated from high school. And then I believe right now that by then we set the pattern for other future cowboys coming in. I've been broke up like I think the first time I broke my jaw half in two. Bull hit me, and I broke my rib. I broke my rib 7 times, same size. Bull hit me in the side. Never, but I had a determination. I never quit, and you got to have that to be a bull rider. And I broke my legs, and I rode bulls with a broke leg, and I broke the collarbone twice. Yeah, I had to stop then because you can't ride with that broken collarbone. You can't hardly get out of bed. So, and I broke my arm, and really the bull didn't break my arm. I got off the bull and hit the fence and shattered that little bone in my arm. That stopped me for almost a year. If you participate in a rodeo and ride bulls, you're going to get hurt. It's just when. It's coming. It's just a matter of when. Anybody that is a bull rider right now, they will tell you you're going to get hurt. It's just how bad. You don't know how bad you're going to get, but you're going to get hurt. It's just a matter of time when one of them bulls is going to hurt you.
Yeah, so this is where I am with the project now. So like I said, I started this project, in 1993, thinking it was going to be a month. Here it is 30 years later. I'm still doing this. So it won't leave me alone. But I mean, I've just met some of the most amazing people. What I'm doing now is mainly a lot of videos. I went down to Houston a couple years ago and wanted to track down some of the folks in the book. And I thought, you know, I think videos might be the way to go with this. So I'm making a series of short little videos. This is one of them. You know, there's a lot more to his story, but I just wanted to, you know, show you this little part. But I'm going to edit these down, and I'm either going to go one way with it, where I'll put up little short videos, maybe 3 to 5 minute videos on Instagram, or make it into one long piece. I haven't really figured it out yet. I want to go back and do some more videos and see what happens. Photographed this young man. His name is David Cormier. Went down. This is when I was working for National Geographic. Well, I didn't tell you that part. So after it ran in the magazine, and then ran in the newspaper, Geographic called me up and said they'd like for me to do a story for them. So I worked on this part of the story for about 6 months. And I found this man, David Cormier. He's 24 years old. I wanted to find somebody who was sort of the quintessential black cowboy, the quintessential cowboy who really, you know, spent his life as a cowboy and not just did it on the weekends. I mean, this is all he did was cowboy life. So I went down and spent about a week with him. And he had a limp when I was down there. So I went to the doctor with him. They did an MRI on his knee, and turned out he had cancer in his knee. And so when I went back home, his mother called me a couple of weeks later and said they had to amputate his leg, and then shortly after that he passed away. So I never got a chance to go back and spend any time with him, but he was just an amazing young man, and they have a rodeo named after him down in Brownsville now. Bumpsy Bullock and his son Jordan. So Bumpsy is who owned the stables that I worked in, the White House stables. And Jordan was his 12-year-old son. I guess a couple of years ago or whenever it was, during COVID, maybe 3 years ago, I got a call from Bumpsy saying he'd like for me to get in touch with Jordan. And I hadn't heard from Bumpsy in 25 years. I said, Bumpsy, it's so great to hear from you. He said, well, yeah, I'd really like for you to get in touch with Jordan. And so I called Jordan up, who's now in his early 40s, with a daughter of his own. And I said, your dad told me to give you a call. And so he said, man, my dad just passed away. He passed away during COVID. And I was like, that was so bizarre, So I don't know what Bumpsy's intention was, but it connected Jordan and I. So we've done a few things together and probably want to do more things. Jordan's just such an extremely intelligent young man, and he knows everything about horses. This is him now with his daughter. He trains horses up for the Parks Casino in Philadelphia. Trains racehorses. Another person I found out just through the grapevine was somebody said, you need to find Molly Stevenson, who had a ranch down in south of Houston. And she inherited from her mother, who had the first black-owned ranch in Houston. So I went down, met with her, and she said, oh, this is her feeding her little goat there. She said, I'm going to get married next week. And I'm like, what? You're going to get married? And so I went back and I photographed her wedding. So this is her on her wedding. Come in on the buckboard. This is her and her husband, Cash. This is them now. So I did a little video with them. I mean, they're just such an amazing couple. I had one of the wildest nights with a couple in their 90s that you could ever imagine. I don't want to even get into it, but. So that's the book. And I didn't want the book to come across as sort of this historical text, although it does have some historical text in it by Art Burton, who's a leading historian on the Black West. I wanted it to be a love letter to the lifestyle. That's what it was. It's not any kind of, even though the photographs are shot in this narrative structure, the book is not in a narrative structure. They're just pictures that we pulled out that we thought were, just beautiful pictures, and put them in the book in not any sort of chronological order, but just to show that, this lifestyle in this, hopefully commemorative way, and a nod to how beautiful the lifestyle is. So I'm going to switch over now to my fine artwork. So this is the door in my studio. I won't show you the rest of the studio because it looks kind of like that. But one of the first things I did, as far as when it comes to art, was I had a little funny thing that happened in the darkroom. I put my paper in. So I was printing images on 20 by 24. I was doing some nighttime landscape pictures of Philadelphia. I put my paper in upside down in the easel. And so what happened was it sort of gave it this sort of milky, sort of creamy, sort of pictorialist sort of thing that happened. And so I started playing around with that and turned it into a thing that I did for like 10 years. So this is one of those pictures. This is a garden in North Philadelphia. These are really long exposures, like 40, some of them are 45 minutes long. It was completely dark when I made this picture. And they have sort of this warm glow about them. And so I didn't want to use a bleach to tone out the dark pixels or the dark silvers in the paper. I wanted to just give it a warm glow. So I experimented with different kinds of toners and things and arrived upon coffee. So these are all toned in Folgers dark roast, and then washed enough so it neutralizes out brings up the pH, or it neutralizes the pH value in them. It's another one. So these are all nighttime shots of Philadelphia. This is one of the ones that's in the Smithsonian. Another one. So I just wanted to look at Philadelphia at night from all different kinds of angles, all different kinds of things. And whatever caught my eye, I didn't really have any sort of particular thing in mind. I'd drive around at night and I would see an image or see a scene and, photograph it. So I took this idea. So I was by that time I had gotten involved with the gallery in Philadelphia, the Sandy Webster Gallery. And one of her clients came to her and said that somebody should go to Cuba. He had just got back from Cuba and said somebody should go to Cuba and photograph it because there's all these great, beautiful, colorful cars down there and, the old women smoking cigars and blah, blah, blah. And so she asked me if I'd be willing to talk to him. I said, sure, So we had a talk. And I said, I would love to go to Cuba, but I don't want to first of all, I don't want to shoot in color. I don't want to shoot, any of the things that you suggested. I want to shoot it in black and white at night. And showed him my process here. And he agreed to it. So he paid for my wife and I to go down for, 3 to 4 weeks and spend some time down there making this portrait of Cuba at night. And so it came out in a catalog called Havana at Night and has been exhibited a few places. This was a street scene in Havana. So if you see that right there, there's a man and a boy sitting right there. And this is about a 45-minute exposure. These lights here are basically just 100-watt light bulbs. But over a course of time, light builds up, and it lit this entire street. This man and boy never moved the whole time, which is amazing. So they imprinted on the film. Call this boy on the Malecon. It's the cover shot. The little, whoops, let me back up. Well, I can't back up. But you saw how the flag sort of faded out at the bottom. There was a light breeze blowing. So it was a long exposure, but the top of the flag didn't move. But the breeze sort of faded out that bottom part of the flag and made it bleed and it just made it bleed off the image. This is on Mercaderi Street. I call this House of Mercaderi. So Havana is a World Heritage Center, and when we were down there, they're doing a lot of construction. So we got into some of the buildings where they were renovating. Che Guevara on a postcard, which I just thought was hilarious. And this is how we got around. This was a busy taxi. Our driver was Ronaldo. We loaded all of our equipment up on this busy taxi, and we just tooled around the city. Spent a lot of time down there on the back of this bicycle. And this is one of the places that showed. This was at the airport. Had another story to do, a story with the garden writer on seeds. And I asked her, I said, well, why don't we just do this? Why don't we just find some seeds and I'll scan these. So these are all taken with a scanner. They're not taken with a camera. But I learned a lot in doing this. And I had taken our kids down to the shore, and they brought back some shells. And I said, well, let's throw these on the scanner and see what happens. So what happened was this project called World in a Grain of Sand. And this is one of the images. So these are just nautilus shells. But I was really intrigued by all the sand that fell out of these and what you could do with those. So over the course of a really cold winter, I just played, sat out in my dark room and played. So actually, what this is it's a black paper where I punched a hole in it and just raised the flap up a little bit, and then shined a light from the top to give the appearance of the solar prominence. I'm really sort of I want to be an astronomer, but I don't want to sit out in the cold for 8 hours. So it was easier to do this in my dark room. This is a green walnut with some wax paper. This is something that my wife pulled out of our back end of our refrigerator, and it was a little moldy. And so I took it and scanned it and turned it into a cloud cover, a planet with a cloud cover. I call this red dwarf, red egg. So I made up this container where I could hold olive oil and suspend things in it, because I wanted to get sort of that idea, that viscosity of space, that idea of distance. And so the olive oil sort of gave me that instead of just scanning it directly on the scanner. This is another egg that I painted black and figured out how to light from underneath. It's almost as if, Michelangelo's painting the Sistine Chapel upside down. So you have to think of everything as if you're looking up at it from the scanner's point of view. I found this. I call this Grand Nebula, which was just a little. So I had photographed an egg, scanned an egg, and then the egg white dried on a piece of glass. And so I took the glass and started doing little samples of it and came up with this. This is one of the shows it was in. It was at the Woodmere Triennial. But the best thing that ever happened to this was when you Google nebula. Where's my pointer thing? Yeah, right there. It shows up. So I made it. I made it as a Hubble Space Telescope astronomer. Thanks to Google. Thank you. I'll be here all night. Another project was we were there, Voices of African American Veterans. This is a project that actually came to me from Yvonne Laddie, one of my colleagues who worked for the Daily News. Said she had this idea. This is coming on the heels of Tom Brokaw's book, about what was it, The Greatest Generation. And there had never been a book about black veterans. So we pitched this idea. We had all sorts of interest in it from some of the major publishers in New York. We settled with HarperCollins. It went through 3 editions. But the book was very simple. It was a photograph of a vet. This is all, again, done on a 4x5 in that toned way that I was doing before. And then a picture of them in their service. So that's basically the gist of the book. We interviewed, I think, about 25 or 30 veterans this way and told their stories. This man, I called him up. He lived in Florence, New Jersey. And I said, I'd like to come up and photograph you for for this book we're doing. And he said, yeah, you can come up and get a picture of me by my tank. And I said, you have a tank? And he said, yeah. And so he had a tank. He had a tank in a park that he'd gotten the defense department to give him, along with some jet fighter and some other things. And he stood there, and if there anybody who looks like a tank, he looks like a tank. This man, Norman Smith, I photographed him. He was in Vietnam, and during his interview, he just talked about how he felt like the war had just split him in half. And so he had a flag hanging out in front of his house, and so that was symbolically how he felt. This exhibit debuted at the National Constitution Center. We had about 500 guests that showed up. It was really an amazing event. We had a lot of the vets showed up, and I think this is one of the first times that they had been honored this way. So it was just a really great experience to see them and see them sort of bathed in, you know, all of this recognition. This is the school violence story that we worked on, that we won the Pulitzer on. My contribution, one of my contributions to this story, was to hang out in South Philadelphia High, where this school violence incident took place and spilled over to the other side of the city. But we wanted to spend some time in South Philadelphia High. They had gotten rid of the principal that was there, and they hired this man, David Hackney, to come in as a new principal. He had come from Lower Merion and you know, really sort of straightened the school out after a few months of some rough going. But he started all these different programs. He started this program, the Lower Marion Anderson Award, so he gave a scholarship to students. Got the school district to cough up some money to give some scholarship program. Telling this young man to pull his pants up. He was really he was really strict about the dress code. No hats, you know, no droopy pants. You know, he was in the hall constantly, where, you know, a lot of principals just sort of hang out in their offices. He was in the hall constantly, and sort of these little boys, these two guys had gotten into a little squabble, and he was there to calm things down. And he also put up all of these different slogans around the school too. He started a table tennis and hip hop club, all in the same room, that I thought was amazing. You know, there were so many visuals that just happened there. The kids did the drama club did a performance, and they were asked to do their performance at the Arden Theater, and this is him handing out you know, roses to the student performers. And that's how it was announced, the Pulitzer. So this is a project I'm working on now with my father's work. My dad was a photographer in the 1940s in our hometown, and so it was kind of a long story. I ended up getting my graduate degree late, and I needed a project to do in the studio, and I had never done a project in the studio before. Since I was a photojournalist, I did everything, you know, out in the field, and so I'd had all these photographs of my dad's work, and I thought, well, maybe I can do something with that. So I started playing around with it. I put all the pictures up on the wall in my studio and started looking at them, living with them, seeing what I could do. I found, and this is just an example, I found these people that looked like they were sort of you know, subsistence farmers, or, you know, from the Dust Bowl era or whatever. And I thought, well, how could I build a world for them? So I built this set in my studio. So all of these here they're images that they're 500 cards that look like the lunar surface. Actually, they're scans from the inside of a mollusk shell, but they look like the lunar surface. And then I wanted it to look sort of unfinished, but also put forward that idea that these people left the Earth to land on this forbidden planet and to start a new life, but it wasn't all that built up to the way that they thought it would be. So this is the image that came from that. It's about 4 feet long. The papers actually we had a big rain the night before I did the final shoot, and all the papers curled up. And I thought, man, you know, this just ruined everything. But it worked out, because I think that it sort of adds a little bit more to the sort of the turbulence of this place that they landed on. And, you know, what are they going to do now? I was thinking about the idea of ambrotypes and 19th century processes. So I just started playing in my studio, trying to come up with something that might get across that idea. When it ended up happening, though, was I ended up making these images where I wanted to think about the community that my dad photographed in. So it was an all-black community in a larger white community. And I wanted to think about the people that lived there. I was reading Bell Hooks at the time and about her father and how he was a photographer and how she talked about that. And one of the things that really caught me was the fact that black people weren't allowed in institutions back when my dad was making these images. And so how could I think about the times that he was photographing and bring his realities forward to the times we live in now? And so I did this through Bell Hooks' essay, and where she talked about how black people weren't allowed in institutions at that time, and they curated their own exhibitions, if you want to call it, on their walls and on their shelves and things. So I made these images. These are all 20 by 24 inch images made shooting through a transparency with glue on the back. It was a really complicated, convoluted thing that happened. But what it produced was sort of this image where if you stand back, you can see the image, but if you walk up close to it, the image sort of dissolves, it breaks away. And I really liked that. I really liked that idea. And then showing all aspects of the community. And then I adhered the paper to glass because I wanted glass to represent how fragile that community was. And if you drop glass, it shatters, and it shatters all over the place. And that community doesn't exist anymore. And I consider myself one of those shards that came off of that, the fragility of the community. But I wanted to represent all different facets of the community, from people that graduated to older people to families to babies, all the way across. So I think there's like 9 images in there. They sit on these shelves on the wall. This one is, I wanted to get across that idea of the sort of innocence lost. If you think about the girls in Montgomery that were, bombed, Ruby Bridges, just think about those ideas, those children that just didn't have a chance to really to have a childhood. This one, I was thinking about the nighttime and how the slaves traveled using the stars. And I found this photo in my dad's archive, and I wanted to, they're paying reverence to something. It looks like it's a funeral, but I really can't see on the other side, so I didn't know what it was. So I cut them out, put them in this sort of, this frame that has some idea of sort of reverence, and had them looking at the stars, thinking about what is their future, what's their future like. This woman, who later on I found it was my aunt, but if you saw this in person, the image is burned with a laser printer on brown paper. And so this references the brown bag test that some blacks were subjected to back then. And I didn't want to paint on the paper. I wanted the laser to actually burn into the paper, so it's imbued in that paper. The image is actually part of the paper. And if you saw it in person, her hair is actually charred. It's burned. And I wanted to, sort of get across that. I call this the test. So that was that. And she was a light-skinned woman, so she would have passed the brown bag test. But if you were dark-skinned, and you didn't pass, you had a reduced role in society to a certain extent. Again, this is thinking about bell hooks and how images were curated on shelves and desks and people's bureaus and things. So this picture actually stands about 5 feet tall, And I wanted this woman, I saw this woman here, and she's just so headstrong. And she has that, I got that tilt sometimes from my mom, and I knew I was in major trouble, you know. But she don't play, you know. And I wanted to sort of bring across this idea of this strong black woman. And I actually cut her out of the image and then pulled her forward. So it looks as if you saw it in person, it looks as if she's actually sort of pulling herself out of the paper. She's ripping herself out of the paper. And it stands on its own. So it stands as if it's a little, you know, desk. It's an enlarged version of a you know, desk frame. And I'm still kind of playing around with these. So the great thing about my dad was he saved all the good, the bad, and the ugly of his negatives. So I'm starting to scan some of these negatives. And I love what some of them are doing. They're all black and white, but I'm scanning them in color on the scanner and letting the scanner put in the color. My dad had sort of this quirky humor, sense of humor about him. You know, I love the shoes there and the looks that these women have to each other. There's a conversation going on there, but we don't know what it is. You know, and the fact that it's sort of split in half. I don't know. There's just something there that just really struck me as odd but beautiful. This was another one. This woman in a white dress, sort of standing in this field with the hint of a landscape behind her, but there's all this, you know, color swirling around her and sun coming out. This woman who doesn't have eyes. For some reason, the film decided not to give her eyes, but it also, she has this sort of all-knowing, sort of oracle-like presence about her. These boys that look like they're almost being transported up. Again, it's all just chemical stains on the negative that produce this. And this was the first showing of it in France a couple of years ago, in Rennes, France. So this is the last thing, the last thing I'm going to show you. So I'm working on this project now called House of the Living. What it involves is a 1,400 square foot greenhouse that's around the corner from our house in Elkins Park. It sits on the estate of the Elkins estate, and we walk our dog by there probably every other day, probably. That's our dog, Winston, who's an absolute lunatic, but we got him and we have to keep him. But he's a fun little puppy. But he's the one that sort of led us to this place, to this greenhouse. So this was the greenhouse. And we were walking by one day, and I thought, what would it be if we engraved the faces of gun violence victims or murder victims into some of the glass, with the idea that the light shining through would nurture the plants in the side. So that was the idea that just popped in my head. Didn't have anywhere to go with it. It was during COVID. All the government, all the city, you know, the county buildings were closed down. And so as we walked by it, the place started getting cleaned out. And a young man walked out one day, and I told him my idea. He worked for Farmer John, which is a black-owned agricultural group in Philadelphia, black woman-owned agricultural group in Philadelphia. Told him my idea, and he said, yeah, I think we could maybe work with you on this. So we started working with him. We found a group called Amir Healing Center that they had done work with. Amir, they help, they facilitate families of gun violence victims for counseling, for therapy, for different events and things like that. So they have a huge, I guess, constituency of these families of murder victims. So we started working with them, and so this is what we came up with. So this is the House of the Living as it stands now. We have 90 different portraits there. We asked the families to send in a portrait. After we do it, and our students are doing all this work. Our students do the interviews and do all the intake for all the different portraits. This is it on the other side. That's it from the inside. We asked the families to send photographs that shows their loved ones in life. We didn't want to have the building turn into a big yearbook. So all the images show a little bit of the personality of that person. And we decided not to put death, like dates in there. The families decide, and we're working really closely with the families on this project. They didn't want, dates, birth and death dates. So we decided not to. So it's just the portrait of the person and their name. So one of our students burning one of the portraits. So we use our laser scanner, laser printer at school to make all the images. These are burned into a frosted plexiglass. It's just doing one of the installations. So just to say that, so we're moving the greenhouse because we were having some problems. We're not actually moving the physical greenhouse. We're moving the panels. We're going to build a new greenhouse at Aubrey Arboretum. So we're in that process. We're going to call that House of the Living 2.0. And so we're talking about this weekly with all the folks involved. This is one of the family members and her loved one. We had an event where we invited the families to come. The first event, this was the first event, we had 150 people show up. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what the vibe would be in the, in the gathering. But it turned into just a big family reunion. It was amazing. This was the one 2 Junes ago. We had another one in October where we invited, and the house was more filled out. We invited the public, and we invited all the families and press at that time. So we had 350 people show up for that, which was just an amazing, amazing event, and the families got so much out of it. And I was, happy to see that they approved of the whole thing. So we're moving forward with it, and we're doing it all for them. But now, we're thinking about the community, outside community. What kind of events can we have there once we build the thing? So that's what we're doing now. So thank you.
So I think we can, one more round of applause for Ron. Thank you, and thank you. That was an amazing journey and remarkable work. So I want to invite everybody to join us. Thank all of you for coming out today, and we'll be having a reception, as I said, outside. Ron's going to hang out for a bit, so there'll be opportunity to chat with him and have conversations about his work. There's a lot to talk about there, so thanks very much.